Hello all, my name is Shashwat Kothari. I am a member of Young Indians Guwahati chapter, and joining us today is Ketaki Bardalai Ma'am. She has been serving as the Executive Director of Shishu Sarothi Center for Rehabilitation and Training for Multiple Disability since 2018. She was also actively involved during the formative years as its secretary from 1989 to 2005. Ma'am also is a board member of the Foundation for Social Transformation since 2012. FST, as it's also called, is an organization run and managed by the people from Northeast India to support grassroots initiatives in the region. Ma'am also helped operationalize its work as its executive director from 2008 to 2012. In the past, she has also worked with several organizations like Rehabilitation Council of India and AADI, which is Action for Ability, Development and Inclusion, where she has implemented various innovative projects and has been responsible for awareness and legal literacy and advocacy of rights for persons with disabilities. I warmly welcome you, ma'am. I would also like to welcome Mrs. Amvalika Senapati. She is a lawyer by profession and has been actively engaged with Shishu Sarothi for over 14 years. She plays a vital role in awareness creation, advocacy for disability inclusion, and provision of legal aid support to persons with disabilities. She is also an expert of built environment accessibility and has conducted hundreds of access audits of public buildings for the governments and various PSUs and NGOs. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. So today we are going to discuss about the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, or in short, RPWD Act. Let me start by asking ma'am about the overview of an act of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act and its significance in India.
The Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act actually was enacted in 2016, and it basically was promulgated after we signed the UN Convention for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and ratified and signed the document, so which made it sort of, the country was legally bound to bring its laws align them with the provisions of the convention. And as you know, the UN conventions are sort of a higher level document, and that involves, and particularly the UNCRPD involved active participation in the drafting of people with disabilities world over. So in that sense, the law is, we would say, a landmark sort of piece of legislation. It's, to some of us who've been in the sector for a long time, we felt that this is like, it's a perfect law. It sort of covers everything, and the most important thing is it's based on the human rights. It includes various aspects of the human rights of people with disabilities. It talks about respect for the inherent dignity of people. It talks about the duty upon all of us to ensure that there is no discrimination against people with disabilities. It looks at things like the legal sort of capacity of people with disabilities, which is something that was in the, basically this stereotypical idea was people with disabilities do not have legal capacity, they cannot do anything. But people with disabilities themselves have sort of come forward and spoken about the fact that they can, and if they're given the opportunity, they can make choices. They may need some support, but they have the ability to make those choices if they're given the right support and the accommodation. So things like that. It focuses on women and children and the evolving capacities of children with disabilities. So to that extent, it's really something very precious, and it makes for wonderful reading, and if we can implement it in letter and spirit, it will be game changing.
So I think, as you said, it's a landmark act for India, and especially for of course, the people involved in this sector. I think this would be really helpful for us to enable the uh, people. Now, I would also want you to explain more about the core principles as it's outlined in the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act.
Uh, the core principles are what we rely upon in the Act are taken from the CRPD, the UN Convention document that Ma'am was just speaking about. So these conventions are at the very foundation of the RPWD Act. These principles are basically the guiding principles which will guide us in how we ensure that people have access to their rights. So you may give them the right to health, but if you do not give them it in a dignified way, that is not the right way of giving the access to health. So it just enumerates the 8 principles in the very core principles. They are being the right to inherent dignity of the individual, the right to autonomy and equality of every person with disability, the autonomy to make decisions for themselves and live independently as far as they can, the right to non-discrimination, the right to accessibility in everything, the right to accepting them as part of the human diversity. There's also the principle of equality between men and women with disability, and another principle about the evolving capacities of children. So these are the core principles of the Act which are to be followed with, and just to emphasize more on the principle of discrimination and equality, the Act has taken a two-pronged approach here. Very interestingly, because these are core to us having access to our rights, the Act has emphasized upon the right of principle and accessibility. Sorry, I forgot to mention also accessibility. These 3 principles are principles in the Act, so they are to be followed whenever we are giving access to any right. So the principle of dignity, the principle of accessibility, whether you're accessing health or education, we have to follow this principle. But because they are so essential and they're the crux of getting your access to rights, they are also made rights in themselves. So there are also sections in the Act. So they are rights itself. They are not just guiding principles, but they are also right. So right to accessibility is a right. But if I say accessibility is a principle, it means if I am going to access my health right in the hospital, is the health service accessible for me? So that is a principle. But my right to accessibility is, can I access the building? Can I access the road? You know, that's different. So it's a 2 layers. So these 3 are the core of it. You know, the right to accessibility, equality, and non-discrimination. So they are rights and they are also principles in the Act.
So I think you mentioned that there are 8 core principles.
Right.
So I'd like to ask, what are the key enablers for the effective implementation of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act?
Well, we in our organization in Shishu Sarothi, we have been believing all along that that the keys, as we say, that can unlock the potential of a child with disability or a person with disability are access to health, education, and when we talk about education, we do include skill development opportunities as well, and accessibility, as Amvalika mentioned. So these, if a person has access to health, access to the therapy or the interventions that they need to manage their disability, if they can have access to education and or skill development, then they can make something of their lives, they can become productive, contributing citizens. If they have accessibility, of course, that is the third enabler. So if the roads are accessible, if buildings are accessible, if modes of transport are accessible and they can go and move around at will instead of being dependent on somebody, if these 3 enablers, as it were, are provided, then you unlock the potential of a person, and the chances are that they will become contributing citizens rather than somebody who is going to be dependent on the family and a burden and always waiting for like charity or a dole, or on the, dependent on the welfare of uh, other people or the government or schemes and so on. And in economic terms also, this could translate, this could be a better way to go.
Right.
It's resource heavy to keep pouring resources into charity and dole. It's harder to sustain that. Whereas if you invest in health, access equity in health, in education, and skill development, I subsume that under education, then the prospects are so much better.
Right. So the people that are not taking part in the economy as of now because of places of work not being accessible or
Exactly.
them not able to learn, they'll be able to come in the economy.
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
definitely it will help.
So when we return to that investment.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct, right. So that sorry. So I'll just
I don't have the figures, but there is a global health equity report of the WHO which talks about the fact that the return on investment is really, it's worth investing in health and education,
okay.
and the return is so much more than
The
not
investment.
doing it. Yeah.
Right. So I think ma'am has already explained what accessibility means in general. But I've recently heard this concept of universal design.
Okay.
So I would like to know more about universal design and how do we implement it, and how does it affect every one of us, not just persons with disabilities.
So this is still an area where it's probably a very new area, domain, where work is being understood and research is still being done. Probably universal design, the work and the understanding started happening in the late 80s. So it's about a 4-decade-old, concept of. It's a concept beyond accessibility. So accessibility is basically looking at how can people with disabilities use the building or go to the road or use the transportation or have access to this particular information or communication. But universal design is saying that people with disability and other groups will be able to use that road, that building, that transportation or that information. So whereas when we say there's a blind person and the blind person cannot see what's happening in the movie, or a deaf person cannot understand what is being spoken in the movie, but you or I, if we are watching a series or a movie on Netflix, and it's a very good, famous award-winning movie, we want to watch it, but it's Korean or French, you and I don't know, so we take help of the subtitle. So that's universal design, where I am or you are able to watch something which is in another language in the way we can do it. So it is not only about people with disability, a deaf person is also able to read the subtitle, but you and I are also being able to access so much of resources or entertainment or whatever information and communication, which is in a medium which is otherwise not accessible for us. Similarly, if you go to a restaurant or a hotel and you see a toilet and there's a signboard in front of it saying men and women, toilet for men and women, you and I are able to read, we will know which toilet to go to. But what about somebody who's illiterate? So then if you have a pictograph, a picture of a man or a woman, so that picture speaks a lot. So you don't need to be literate to understand that. So here it's not only about people with disability, it's also about other groups, somebody who's illiterate or somebody like you and me who's literate, but if we are in China and you and I won't understand Chinese when it's written in men and women, so you and I will understand the pictograph. So when we use the pictograph, it's a universal design. Across languages we cut across, so we are able to understand that. Similarly, if in a building, same concept of universal design, if you apply it in a building and you have a ramp, what is stopping you, me or anyone else to use a ramp? Whereas if you're doing a lift, you're doing a staircase, then only able-bodied people are able to use the staircase. Old people with arthritis, they will have difficulty with the staircase. If you or I are carrying a suitcase, which is a trolley suitcase, a staircase is difficult. If there's a mother carrying a pram or a stroller with a baby, a staircase is difficult. So it is not just a wheelchair user, but other people in other situations who will benefit from a ramp. So that's a universal design, and ramp is one of the most beautiful examples of universal design. So there are universal design. The concept can be used in education. It can be used the way your transportation is designed, the roads are designed. So if you have a zebra crossing, if you have a footpath which is very low, and there's a slope to the road, so that's also helpful for us. No, unlike the footpaths we have here, which is foot high. So it's difficult for all of us sometimes. So that's a universal design in road. It can be in road, it can be in your transportation, it can be in your buildings, and also in products. So just to give you an example, one example was ramp in a building. One example is the four wheels we have in the suitcase which all of us use nowadays. So that's a very beautiful example, because a pregnant lady who cannot carry heavy load, she will be able to carry that suitcase. A young child can push that suitcase. An old gentleman who cannot lift weight, and so also a disabled person. So universal design can be in products, so it can be in everywhere. So it's a very beautiful concept, and it's still evolving. There's so much more to do in this area.
Universal design as a concept, I think, as ma'am has explained already, we need to, it's not only for the disabled people, it's for all of us. Now, like to come to how important it is to consider disability as a cross-cutting issue that requires convergence in all aspects of our lives. Not just for disabled people, but also in for the able people.
So, based on our experience in work, we find that when when it comes to disability, when you look at the causes of disability, that comes in the domain of, say, health, preventive health, public health, and so on. And then rooted from there would be, say, things like deep-rooted attitudes, change, and traditional beliefs, and so on. Where, when it comes to doing something about it, then you have the route takes you towards education, towards rehabilitation, towards education. When it comes to doing something beyond that, you would go into, say, skill development, employment, and so on. So the life of a person with disability is a human being and has to be recognized as a part of human diversity, which is something that is clearly sort of enunciated in the CRPD, in the Act as well. It flows from that idea. So their needs cut across all domains. We have been working in the sector for so many years, and we find it very frustrating when anything to do with disability, supposing you want to talk to an official or anybody in society about it, there is, particularly in officialdom, there is a tendency to say, oh, you want to do something about disabled people, go to the what used to be social welfare, and now it's been segregated and bifurcated into the social justice and empowerment department. That's the domain for you. You go to them, they will deal with your issues. But actually, we want to talk to, say, the health mission or the health department about what they need to do to make, to intervene, to provide preventive health, or to provide the rehabilitation that is needed as early as possible. We want to engage with the education sector, for instance. We want to talk to the skill development mission. We want to talk to higher education. We want to talk to, other domains where people, where opportunities will open up. Transportation, the PWD, for instance. So, it cuts across, their needs cuts across everything.
Every sector.
So this is this is one way. I don't know whether you are getting my point, but it cuts across all domains. So we are constantly appealing for a kind of convergence of disability. And actually, one of the things that we would have liked is ideally when every department or ministry had allocated a percentage, say, of their budget, which would be proportionate to the population in the country of people with disabilities for disability work in that, rather than squeeze it into a separate,
Another department.
yeah, and something, and then we get locked in there, and that's what shouldn't happen. It should be everybody's concern
Responsibility.
and responsibility. Exactly.
Just add on to what Ma'am is saying. So, just to simply put what Ma'am said, PWD, just wanted to give an example because when we are talking about the right to accessibility, and most of the time we don't see people with disabilities on the road because they can't come out of their houses.
Right.
It's not easy and it's not cheap for all of us to always afford an Uber or an Ola. They cannot take a public transportation when they are a wheelchair user, so they have to rely on taxis. They can't do that on an everyday go. So even if they do get a job, they will not opt to take that job because they're spending more money than they're actually earning by taking a private car every day. So they need accessibility. Now to have accessibility on the road, we cannot ask social justice and empowerment. It's PWD building and PWD road who has to make our roads and our building accessible. And tomorrow if there's a flood happening here, it is the disaster management authority who is providing for the provisions in the refuge camp, all of the other provisions during emergency and disaster. Our default setting is right now this, that we do not immediately think of disability. Budget is the next step. Also there are certain things we could do, maybe very small, which doesn't require budget. That doesn't happen, and not because there's bad intention. Awareness, we are not at the space where we know that this is how we need to react. So it is about the need for creating awareness in this space, and budget absolutely needs to be there, because right now the budget, what Ma'am said, is allocated for social justice and empowerment. That budget is all towards designing and having tailoring schemes, welfare schemes. That is not for making my education accessible, my roads accessible. So that is very limited budget only for welfare, but not for rights, accessing rights. So that's a limitation.
So, as Ma'am gave an example of how every government department should have a separate budget for
That's an
disability.
ideal world.
I think in an ideal world, I think yes, definitely. So that's I think a very good example. How do you think? Are there any other amendments or acts or laws that the government can bring in similar to what you said just now to improve the lives?
Yeah. So one example comes to mind is right now when we talk about the right to education, there are a lot of gaps between the government documents and policies, acts and policies. Say for example, Right to Education Act is saying that children will have a right to study in schools. It is also talking about special schools to some extent. So is RPWD. But if you look at what is the standard to be followed by a special school, that is not mentioned. So for other regular schools, the standards are mentioned. But for these kind of schools, what are the standards to be followed? What is going to be the teacher-student ratio? That is not there. What is going to be the size of the school or the facilities, infrastructure in the school? Everything is given very beautifully in the RTE Act, but those doesn't apply to special school. So there are gaps, and now with the NEP also certain gaps are coming out. So probably government will have to work towards at some point towards having convergence and alignment across all the documents, acts and policies. This is something that needs to be done. Otherwise, this RPWD Act, like Ma'am said, is a path-breaking legislation, and with implementation, a lot can be done.
As you brought the topic of implementation, how do you think the act is being implemented, or what can we do better to implement the act?
On our part, we can create awareness, and maybe Amvalika will tell you more about the work that she has done in that. But as far as the Act is concerned, each state is supposed to have a state commissioner for persons with disabilities, whose role it is to ensure the implementation, to take stock of how the Act is being implemented, and to redress grievances and so on. Invariably, so there's a provision for this position, and actually, as far as the Act is concerned, they have a lot of rights. They have the rights of a civil court and so on. But in most cases, in most states, the person who is the state commissioner for persons with disability is invariably an official who is holding it as a dual charge or triple charge or quadruple charge or whatever. So then it's just a token kind of a thing very often, or even if they are well-meaning, they probably are so beleaguered by all the other responsibilities that they cannot give adequate time, and it's not adequately resourced. Their offices are not adequately resourced. So that's one. So it takes a lot of initiative on their part to really push that agenda. Ideally, the person should be a person with disability. So, like, you wouldn't have a commissioner for, say, a minorities commission, the head being a person who's not a minority person from the minority groups, for instance, or a SCST commission would be a person from that group. So similarly, Nagaland is the only state in the country, as far as I know, that has a person with disability who is a state commissioner, and she is really trying hard to make a change in Nagaland, for instance. So, just saying that that the Act has provisions to ensure its implementations. A lot of it is left to the drive and initiative of the authorities who are there in that position. On our part, organizations like ours who've been working for many years in the sector, of course, we do our bit by raising awareness. Assam is the only state, if I'm not mistaken, the only state that has implemented Section 39 of the Act, which talks about raising awareness.
Okay.
So you can talk
a
about
little bit about this. So this act came into force in 2017, and in 2019 we got the go-ahead from the government of Assam, because Section 19 says that the responsibility is upon the government to create awareness amongst the masses, amongst its different cadres of people, like community at large for sure, but also amongst its officials, amongst media, amongst judicial, legislative, amongst teachers and students in colleges, so amongst different stakeholder groups. Awareness is to be created. So this is the responsibility of the government. And Assam government was the first government, and till now I think no one has done it at the scale that government of Assam has done in 2019, when government of Assam gave us the work of implementing this awareness work. So we did it on behalf of the government of Assam, across Assam, through state level programs, 5 zonal programs, 25 district programs. It was a program across the state. It was spanned over for 1 year, but because of the pandemic, it just closed in the early part of 21. And through this program, we were able to reach out to more than 6,500 stakeholders through all of the programs, and that was the start. But much more needs to be done on awareness at all levels.
Yeah, exactly. So just to reiterate, it's the awareness that needs to be created at 2 levels. One is for what we call rights holders, which is people with disabilities, families of children or families of persons with disabilities who need to know what their rights are, what the law says, and so on. And duty bearers, people who need to know what the law says so that they can implement it.
Right.
And very often what tends to happen when grievances come to us, this is what we find, that there is a significant gap in awareness amongst at both levels. And this duty bearers is not just senior officials. It's, as she says, down to the grassroots level officials.
Also,
everybody needs to know what the law says and do their bit at their level. So it's as important to create awareness at a village level as it is at the state capital level, amongst senior officials or polity or whatever.
I think one of the most common issues that a person with disabilities faces is the issue of humiliation. And sometimes people in general, even if without intent, they call or they say something that might hurt the person, but without any bad intention. So, how does the Act address these issues of humiliation against persons with disabilities?
So the Act clearly calls it out as a no-no. It's not acceptable. it clearly says, so if section 92, if I'm not mistaken, which actually makes it punishable.
Is
Right?
it punishable to make fun or ridicule or people with disabilities or harm them or neglect them? And what you said, sometimes even if we don't mean well, we use wrong languages or wrong ways of undignified ways of addressing them. But if you look at the very name of the act, the name of the act is the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. Now, persons with disabilities is the term which has been accepted, recognized by the United Nations. The United Nations in its Convention on Rights of People with Disability, and the same term, rights of persons with disabilities, is the term we use in our act, the RPWD Act. It is not an act called Rights of Differently Abled People. It's not an act called Rights of Specially Abled People or Specially Challenged People or Handicapped People. So these are terms which we very often see all of us are using around, but that is not the term of the legislation because these are considered as derogatory terms. The moment you call a person with disability differently able, we are kind of compartmentalizing them and segregating them as somebody different from the common man. So that's undignified, that is hurting their dignity, that is kind of sidelining them from mainstream society. All of us are differently able. Sachin Tendulkar would be differently able from Ian Thorpe, and each of us will have a different capacities and capabilities. So that is not to be used to segregate them. And also very often we use other limiting terms, like where we look on disability from the medical or from the charity aspect, and we use subjective terms like suffering from cerebral palsy, or we say suffering from autism, or we say wheelchair bound. So we are supposed to use positive language, neutral language, and as far as possible, always we are supposed to use person first language. So he or she is a person first, and he or she is limited by the disability which arises because of the barriers in the environment. So today if you have called me for a function which is held in the first, second floor, and I am a wheelchair user, I cannot go up to the first, second floor, it is, and cannot participate in your function, it is not because I will not understand what is happening in the function or not be able to take part. I am not able to go up because of the staircase. So it is the barrier which is stopping me from participating, and the barrier is in my environment. So the barrier is external to the person. The person does not have the limit. The person has, that way we each of us have our limits, right? What we can do, cannot do, capacities. So this is what it is looking at, to use person first language, to use positive terminologies. So we will not be using words like lame, deaf and dumb. It should be deaf and speech impaired. We can use the word deaf and blind, that is okay. But in the other things, we cannot use words like mentally retarded. That's a term which is not used in the RPWD Act. The right dignified way is to call it intellectual disability. Person with autism, not suffering from autism. Person with cerebral palsy, not suffering from cerebral palsy. So these are the ways we have to use the language in a positive way. So, and a lot depends on that. The person's dignity, his very respect. The core of it is on, reliant on how you call them, how you address them.
So I think what the things that you mentioned about this all comes under disability etiquettes, and this is
absolutely,
I think
absolutely
one of the most major issues that needs to be created. The awareness needs to be created about.
How to talk about disability, and we all tend to come from what is called an ableist perspective. We think that we are able and that person is not able, so we couch our terms in a lot of euphemisms,
like ma'am said, especially able, differently able. These are very common terms that we use.
And actually this has been debated and discussed in the formulation of the convention, and the phrase is disability. So person first terminology, so it's he or she is a person or a child first, and then the disability is another part subsequent to the being of the person.
So about the rights of persons with disabilities act, can you share any instances where you have intervened in cases pertaining to the act? Any like humiliation, discrimination?
Well, we've done a lot of legal counsel, some litigation as well, and it's encouraging that most of the litigation that we've taken up we've got favorable judgments for that. Um, there are so many instances, of denial in admission to colleges and assumption that a person with disability cannot, say, do engineering or do take up a course in medicine, join a medical college, for instance. This is an assumption, and hence that person cannot do. Oh, you have a disability, you won't be able to manage, so go somewhere else. But the law talks about that reservation and that quota, and so once that reservation is there, they are duty bound actually to give that admission. It's for the person with disability to decide whether they can or cannot. You have to leave it to them. You cannot decide for them. And this whole, I remember years ago in the earlier avatar of the law, the first Chief Commissioner for Disabilities was a senior bureaucrat who addressed a meeting of bureaucrats senior officers in the school, and this topic came up. They said, how can a blind person join medical, do medicine, study medicine? And he said, it's not our business to decide that. The law has given that person the right to choose what he or she wants to do, and given them that reservation. If they get it on the basis of their merit and the reservation that there is a provision for, the decision whether that student can or cannot do is for that. It's for the student to decide. If they fail and they cannot do, then that is there. It's on them. But it's not on you to decide that you can't do and you will fail, so don't join. Things like that, So there have been, and among so many other litigation, there is provision for protection of employment in, say, government jobs, for government employees who acquire a disability during the course of their service. So those, we have redressed a lot of those kind of grievances. There have been somebody who acquired a disability on account of mismanagement or some problem during an immunization drive, for instance, the compensation due to that person. Various things. That's just the litigation part. But apart from that, I think we've given representations and sent notices on, or helped people draft the right, using the law, the legal provisions.
Add on to this. So like we were saying, so most often it is not this that people with disabilities are denied their rights because the duty bearer or the person sitting in that office is, has a bad intention. Nahi dengi, they don't have that intention ki disabled people will not get it. Mostly it arises because of the lack of information ki there's such law which provides them with this right, so this needs to be implemented. It's because of the gap in knowledge. So whenever we come across instances, many people with disability come with us. Sometimes a parent will come to us saying that I have been posted to such a very backward district, I cannot go there because there are no services for my child with high support needs, which I am getting here in Guwahati. Here I am getting regular therapy, special education options for my child, but I won't get it in that very interior district. So if I am posted there, it's to the detriment of my child's development. And there is a provision of the DOPT ministry where it says that parents of children with disability who are the sole caregivers or the primary caregiver, they should be given an option to skip the regular transfer that happens in their department because they need to access their child's benefit. So when we help, like Pam said, we help them draft the representation, and when they submit it into the department, in most cases till now, we have seen that the department responds favorably. It's maybe because of lack of awareness that such and such circular or notification of the DOPT is there. They don't, they put them into the regular routine transfers. So there are other instances of how people with disabilities do not get promoted in the government job. Just because you're blind and the person maybe joined the job 20 years back as a fourth grade employee, and in 20 years he has seen people who have joined after him get promoted into grade 3, but he has not been promoted because there's the mindset that he has blindness, he won't be able to perform. So these are discriminations that are seen in the workplaces, and that we have helped redress with the help of redressals and representations, and sometimes also as a last measure going to the court.
So, as I could understand from this talk today we had, the most pressing issue that we have, not only amongst the members of the government that are involved in this, all of us people that are not related to persons with disabilities or just a part of the general population, is awareness.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Like you talked about universal design. It's such a simple thing to implement, but we do not very often think about it.
Yeah.
So I think the part that the regular sorry, I should not use the word regular, but the
Person without
disability.
Yes.
Sorry, that's the correct
Yeah,
word, as
correct,
ma'am mentioned about the awareness. So I think the person without disabilities, even they should also consider spreading awareness amongst ourselves, so that the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act goes on to help more and more people. And as ma'am also mentioned that the investment that the government can do on such universal designs, and anybody
can do.
that will create more and more returns, and of course it will be beneficial for the economy in the future.
Even at the family level, if they choose to invest the time and effort in the health and education and whatever skill development to the extent that they can, there is a good chance that there will be a better track record for that.
Yeah, just add on to this last bit when you said that with more investment, not from the government, ma'am said anybody. And when you say anybody, it is not only to benefit people with disability or their family, it's also benefiting the person who is doing it. Just let me give you one example. You take the GS Road, the lifeline of Guwahati. On this GS Road, small and big, fine dining, roadside places, there are probably more than 200 eateries, hotels, restaurants. How many of them are accessible? They are not. So what happens is, if tomorrow there's a family where there's a person with disability, especially a wheelchair user, we want to go out for a family occasion, we will be looking for which place is accessible, because I want to take my family member along, or a friends group, they want to go out for a coffee in the evening on a weekend, so they will go to that one or two place on this road with 200 options which is accessible. So basically your clientele from this group of people, and which is a large group. According to WHO report, 15% of the world's population is with disability, some significant disability. So by not addressing their concerns, making things accessible, we are also choosing, as businessmen, as other providers, we are choosing to exclude them. But it's also an opportunity for us, right? So it's a two-way street.
For the private sector also, it's a very huge opportunity.
Everybody gains from that. Everybody. Whether it's tourism, so much of potential in tourism. The moment we make it accessible, everybody. And again, it's not just disabled people. It's the growing rich group of retired people who want to go to travel because of old age. They will have knee problem, that problem. So they want universal design.
Right.
So you have the money to spend, but you can't be spending it in an inaccessible place. So
And as you said about the 15%,
it makes business sense
it
to
takes
make
sense to make it
this
accessible.
establishments accessible.
I think all the businessmen should be
Yes,
businessmen and businesswomen should be
through.
hearing this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as you said about the 15% population, you gave a very good example of, it's not just those 15% population, it's also their whole families that's involved. So it's a much larger population is being cut out of the economy.
Yeah.
So I think this has been a really enriching session for me also. I've learned many new things, and I'm sure all the people that have been listening to this podcast also would be enlightened. And I would like to thank both of you to
Thank you for
give
having
us.
Thank you
your
for
time.
having us, and thank you for including this issue with
Yes.
in the discourse of your organization.
Thank you.